"I wish you had never saved me," she whispered, as the cowboy risked everything for her. The sun had barely begun to rise over the small town of Willow Creek, but the fields were already alive with movement. Daniel Harper, a young cowboy in his late 20s, had been awake for hours. He was a man of few words, known in town for his quiet strength and honesty. His family had owned the Harper Ranch for generations, and he had inherited the work ethic that came with it. From dawn until dusk, Daniel's days were filled with caring for his cattle, fixing fences, and tending to the land that had been in his family for longer than anyone could remember. Daniel liked the simplicity of life on the ranch. The open fields, the smell of fresh hay, and the sound of horses' hooves against the ground brought him a sense of peace that city life could never offer. He had few friends, not because he disliked people, but because he had always felt that work and solitude suited him better. There was a certain rhythm to his life, a pattern that he followed without question. Sunup, chores, meals, tending the animals, checking fences, riding through the pastures, then finally sitting on the porch in the evening watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange. But that morning was different. As Daniel rode along the edge of his property, he noticed the clouds gathering quickly in the distance. Dark, heavy clouds rolled across the horizon, swallowing the blue sky. The wind began to pick up, rustling the leaves and bending the tall grass until it seemed the earth itself was trembling. Daniel had seen storms before, of course. Living on the plains meant being familiar with sudden weather changes. But something about this one made his chest tighten, a quiet warning in the back of his mind. By the time he reached the creek that ran near the edge of his ranch, the storm had grown furious. Rain began to fall in thick sheets, and the wind howled like a wild animal. The usually gentle creek had swollen into a raging stream, its waters churning with mud and debris. Daniel's horse shifted nervously beneath him, sensing the danger. Daniel didn't speak. He never did in moments like this. He simply dismounted and tied the reins securely to a tree, scanning the fast-moving water. That's when he saw it. Half submerged in the creek was a car. The vehicle was battered by the current, rocking violently. Inside, through the streaked and muddy windshield, he could see the faint outline of a person slumped in the driver's seat. Without thinking, Daniel acted. Instinct and years of living close to danger kicked in. He grabbed a sturdy rope from his saddlebag, looping it around his waist, and began wading into the rushing water. The current was strong, pulling at his boots and threatening to knock him off balance. Each step was a struggle, but he pressed forward, focusing solely on the car and the person trapped inside. Water splashed his face, soaking him to the bone, but he didn't pause. Time was slipping away. He knew that if he hesitated for even a few moments, the situation could turn deadly. Reaching the car, Daniel could hear the faint sound of shallow, panicked breathing. The driver's window was partially jammed, and the door was nearly impossible to open against the pressure of the water. Daniel jammed the rope under his arm and twisted, using all his strength to break the glass. The window shattered with a loud crack, and the woman inside jolted, coughing and gasping as the water poured in. "Hold on!" Daniel shouted over the roar of the storm, his voice steady despite the chaos. The woman's eyes opened wide with fear and confusion. Her hair was plastered to her face and her clothes were soaked. Daniel leaned in, lifting her through the broken window. The water was icy, numbing his hands, but he held her tightly. He could feel the tension in her body, the panic that came with being trapped in such a terrifying situation. Carefully, he waded back toward the bank, each step a battle against the current that seemed determined to sweep them away. By the time they reached the shore, Daniel was exhausted. The woman was shivering violently, but she was alive. He wrapped his coat around her shoulders and supported her as they stumbled toward his truck. which was parked safely on higher ground. Rain poured down, soaking them both, but Daniel didn't let go. He started the engine and drove her to the small town clinic, praying silently that she would pull through. Inside the clinic, doctors and nurses rushed to help. Daniel stayed in the corner, his clothes dripping and his hair plastered to his face. He watched as they worked on her, checking her for injuries, making sure she was breathing steadily, making sure she was safe. Finally, after what felt like hours but was only minutes, a nurse approached him. "She's going to be okay," she said with a small smile. "Thanks to you." Daniel nodded silently, relief washing over him. He didn't need praise. Saving a life was reward enough. The woman's name was Emily Carter. She was young, probably in her mid-20s, with a quiet beauty that spoke of vulnerability and strength at the same time. She had been driving through the storm to escape something or someone. Daniel didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He had done what needed to be done, and that was enough for now. The townspeople soon learned of Daniel's actions. Word spread quickly through Willow Creek. At the general store, at the diner, and at the church, people whispered about the cowboy who had waded into a raging creek to save a stranger's life. Some called him a hero. Others just shook their heads in amazement, wondering how anyone could have had the courage to face such a dangerous storm. But not everyone responded with gratitude. When Emily woke in the clinic the next morning, her first reaction was not to thank him. Her eyes held a mixture of fear, confusion, and something deeper, pain that Daniel could not yet understand. When she saw him standing quietly by the bedside, she flinched, not out of fear of him, but out of fear of the moment she had survived. Daniel noticed, but he didn't take offense. He had learned long ago that people react to trauma in different ways. Some cry, some scream, some go silent. Emily was silent. Over the next few days, Daniel visited her at the clinic, making sure she had everything she needed. He brought fresh clothes, simple meals, and quiet companionship. He never pressed her to speak, never tried to force her to show gratitude. He simply stayed, a calm presence in a storm of uncertainty. Emily watched him from her bed, noticing the quiet strength in his eyes, the steady way he moved, the unspoken promise that he would not let harm come to her again. She had come to Willow Creek to escape her past, and suddenly her past had caught up to her in a way she could not control. Daniel never spoke much, but when he did, his words were simple, direct, and full of meaning. "You're safe now," he told her one morning, as the rain finally began to subside. "That's what matters." Emily didn't respond immediately. She just stared out the window, watching the sun break through the clouds, casting golden light across the wet fields. For the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. But with that hope came fear. Fear of being tied to someone else's kindness. Fear of being forced to face life when she wasn't ready. Daniel understood this without needing explanation. He didn't push. He didn't make promises. He just remained, quietly showing her that not everyone in the world sought to take advantage of her vulnerability. Some people acted out of instinct, out of compassion, out of a quiet sense of duty that needed no recognition. That evening, as Daniel walked back to the ranch, the storm finally breaking behind him, he felt the weight of the day settle into his bones. The mud in his boots, the ache in his muscles, the wet clothes clinging to his skin, all reminders that life was fragile, unpredictable, and sometimes terrifying. Yet, it was also full of moments that made even the darkest storm worth facing. Emily, sitting alone in the clinic room, thought about the man who had saved her. She thought about the fear she had felt in the car, the cold water, the rushing current, and the strength that had carried her to safety. And she whispered, almost to herself, words she didn't fully understand, words that would echo through the coming days. I wish you had never saved me. But Daniel didn't hear her. And even if he had, he would not have judged her for saying it. He understood that gratitude could be complicated, especially when life had been unkind. And he knew that sometimes saving someone's life was only the first step. The sun set over Willow Creek, painting the wet fields in soft shades of gold and pink. Daniel's silhouette disappeared into the distance, a cowboy who risked everything not for glory, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. And somewhere in the quiet of the clinic, Emily began to face the reality that life had given her another chance, whether she wanted it or not. The days after the storm were quiet but heavy with unspoken tension. Emily Carter had returned to her small rented cabin at the edge of Willow Creek, though her mind felt far from peaceful. Every corner of the room seemed to remind her of the night she had nearly drowned, of the cold water that had pulled at her and the rush of fear she had felt as life and death had hung in the balance. She was alive, yes, but the sense of relief that should have followed was tangled with anger, confusion, and a deep, gnawing guilt. Daniel Harper visited her again, as quietly and naturally as he always did. He never came at times that would force her into conversation, never knocked with sudden insistence, and never demanded a response. He left small packages of food at her doorstep, or helped with chores she struggled to manage alone. Even though the storm had passed, the world outside still felt dangerous to Emily, not because of the weather, but because of life itself. She had spent years hiding from her past, avoiding responsibilities and running from feelings she didn't know how to face. Suddenly, someone had saved her, and she didn't know how to repay that debt, or if she even wanted to. One afternoon, Daniel appeared at her cabin with a basket of fresh bread, eggs, and fruit. Rain had returned in light drizzles, leaving the earth wet and fragrant. Emily opened the door just enough to take the basket. Her hair was still damp from washing, and her eyes were tired, shadowed by nights of restless sleep. "You don't have to come here," she said quietly. Daniel shrugged, as he often did. "I just wanted to see if you're doing okay," he said. His voice was calm, steady, like the rhythm of the land he worked. She wanted to speak, but the words seemed trapped in her chest. All she could manage was a small nod before she closed the door gently, keeping him outside. Even from that distance, Daniel could feel her pain. He understood more than she knew, not because he had shared her exact experiences, but because he had learned, through years of living on the ranch, that people carry invisible burdens. Some are heavy, some are sharp, and some are so old they have become part of who a person is. Over the next few days, Daniel continued his quiet presence. He repaired a broken fence near her property, leaving tools and fresh nails at her door. He brought a basket of eggs from his chickens and left it without a word. Sometimes he rode past on his horse, tipping his hat in greeting, offering nothing more than his presence. It was small, simple, but it meant more than Emily realized. One morning, as the sun rose over Willow Creek and painted the sky in soft shades of pink and orange, Emily found herself standing on the porch, watching Daniel work in the field. The sight of him moving with careful precision, fixing the fence posts, brushing mud from his boots, felt strangely grounding. She realized she had been holding her breath for days, waiting for life to be normal again. And in some way, seeing Daniel carry on with his chores reminded her that normalcy still existed somewhere. Finally, she found herself speaking, her voice hesitant. Why do you keep helping me?" Daniel paused, leaning against the fence post he had been repairing. His eyes, calm and steady, met hers. "Because it's what I should do," he said simply. "Someone needed help. You needed help. It's as simple as that." Emily swallowed hard. Those words, so simple, carried a weight she wasn't prepared to carry. She had lived in a world where no one had come to help, where mistakes and regrets piled higher than she could manage. Someone coming to save her, someone putting themselves at risk for her, was confusing. She didn't know whether to feel grateful, angry, or ashamed. And then, one evening, as the sky turned dark and the first stars began to appear, she said the words she had been holding in her chest for days, almost whispering, as if speaking them too loudly might break something fragile inside her. "I wish you had never saved me." Daniel did not react immediately. He simply nodded, as if he understood more than she had realized. There was no anger, no confusion in his eyes, only quiet patience. Over the following hours, Emily began to open up in ways she hadn't allowed herself in years. She told Daniel about her brother who had died when she was very young, and about the guilt she had carried since that day. She spoke of running away from responsibility, of driving aimlessly to escape memories that haunted her. She told him about the storm, about how she had thought the water might finally take her away from the past that had clung so tightly to her. Daniel listened without interrupting. He didn't judge. He didn't offer empty reassurances or tell her that everything would be okay. Instead, he simply let her speak, letting the words flow out like a river, understanding that sometimes the act of telling someone your story is the first step toward healing. "You didn't want to be saved," he said gently after a long silence. "I can see that." Emily nodded, tears spilling down her face. I didn't want anyone involved. I didn't want to owe anyone anything." Daniel's expression softened. "Life has a way of giving us chances we don't ask for," he said. "Sometimes being saved isn't about asking for it. It's about someone believing you're worth saving." Emily looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. She hated the vulnerability that came with relying on someone else, hated the feeling of needing someone. But at the same time, a small part of her felt relief that someone had stepped in, that someone had cared enough to risk themselves for her. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, Emily began to let Daniel into her world. Not fully, not yet, but just enough to see that trust could exist again. She helped on his ranch when she could, feeding the animals, repairing fences, and learning to ride the horses he had trained. The work was hard, exhausting, and physical, but it grounded her in a way she hadn't felt in years. She realized that strength came not from avoiding responsibility, but from facing it head-on, with someone beside her who did not judge her past mistakes. Daniel continued to be patient, never forcing her to speak or to face her past before she was ready. Sometimes they would ride across the fields in silence, the only sounds the hooves of their horses and the wind moving through the grass. But Emily found comfort in those quiet moments, realizing that healing didn't need to be rushed, and that sometimes just being present with someone who cared was enough. But life has a way of testing even the strongest foundations. One afternoon, a man arrived in Willow Creek, asking for Emily. He was from her past, someone who represented the life she had tried to leave behind. He came with questions, demands, and accusations. His presence was a harsh reminder of the mistakes she had tried to escape, of the debts she had not yet resolved. Emily froze when she saw him. Fear gripped her chest like a cold hand. She had spent weeks trying to feel safe, trying to believe that life could be steady again, and suddenly that safety felt fragile, like a thin layer of ice over deep water. Daniel noticed immediately. He approached calmly, never showing anger, but his presence alone was enough to make the man hesitate. The confrontation escalated, voices raised, but Daniel never threatened. Instead, he offered solutions, ways to resolve the situation peacefully while protecting Emily. His sense of responsibility extended not just to saving her in the storm, but to helping her face the consequences of her past without letting fear control her future. Emily was overwhelmed by the courage he showed. He had risked his life for her once, and was now standing by her side, not demanding anything in return, not asking her to owe him more than she already felt. For the first time in her life, she realized that someone could care deeply without needing something from her. As the man finally left town, Emily felt a mixture of relief and gratitude she couldn't yet put into words. She had survived the storm, but surviving the storm of her past required more than physical strength. It required emotional courage, and Daniel had helped her find that, even without her asking for it. That night, as she sat by the fire in her cabin, she thought about the words she had whispered when she first woke up after the accident. "I wish you had never saved me." She realized that those words were not about Daniel. They were about her fear, her guilt, and her uncertainty about being alive when she had not wanted to face life. Daniel had not tried to change her mind. He had simply been there, steady, patient, and understanding. And slowly, Emily began to understand that being saved did not mean giving up control of her life. It meant having the chance to make choices again, to face the past without running, and to discover that some people's care is selfless and unwavering. And so, the days continued, filled with small moments of growth, quiet reflection, and the slow building of trust. Emily began to see that life could be lived again, not without mistakes, not without fear, but with the possibility of hope. And Daniel, as always, remained a steady presence, showing through his actions that courage and compassion can exist quietly without the need for praise or recognition. In that quiet way, the bond between them began to grow, not through grand gestures or dramatic confessions, but through patience, understanding, and the shared knowledge that sometimes surviving is just the first step toward learning how to truly live. Weeks passed since the storm, and life in Willow Creek had settled into a quiet rhythm once again. The fields were lush and green after the rains, the creek was calm, and the sky stretched wide and clear over the ranch. Yet, for Emily, there was still an undercurrent of tension that she could not ignore. She had survived the storm, she had faced part of her past, and she had begun to trust Daniel Harper. But life had a way of testing people, and Emily's trials were far from over. It started with small things. A letter left at her cabin, an unexpected visitor at the general store, whispers from people who had known her in another town. Emily's past was slowly creeping into the present, like a shadow she could not escape. Every time she thought she was safe, reminders of the life she had tried to leave behind would appear. She had hoped that moving to Willow Creek, to a quiet town far from everything she had known, would allow her to disappear. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. One afternoon, Daniel stopped by her cabin with a basket of fresh vegetables and homemade bread. He was calm, as always, but there was a seriousness in his eyes that Emily had learned to recognize. He didn't speak immediately. He simply set the basket down, brushed some mud from his boots, and waited. Emily watched him from the doorway, her hands twisting nervously. "What is it?" she asked finally, her voice tight. Daniel's gaze met hers. "I think it's time we talk," he said quietly. "About the man from your past." She hadn't expected this conversation yet. She had been trying to face her past, slowly, carefully, at her own pace. The thought of confronting someone she had spent years avoiding made her chest tighten. She wanted to run, to hide, to disappear back into the safety of her cabin. Daniel stepped closer, but he did not move too fast. "I'm not asking you to do anything you're not ready for," he said. "I just want you to know that you don't have to face this alone." For a long moment, Emily didn't respond. She looked down at her hands, tracing the lines of her palms as if they held the answers she sought. Then, quietly, she nodded. I can't handle it by myself," she admitted. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried a weight of honesty she had not spoken aloud in years. Daniel nodded, his expression steady and calm. "Then we'll handle it together," he said. The very next day, the man arrived in Willow Creek. He was older than Emily remembered, his face lined with years of hard living, his eyes sharp and calculating. He carried a folder filled with papers, bills, claims, and reminders of responsibilities Emily had tried to forget. The moment she saw him, her stomach sank. Fear rose in her chest like a physical weight, and she wanted to retreat, to vanish into the safety of the cabin walls. Daniel was already there, standing beside her. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He simply stood tall, his presence a quiet shield between Emily and the storm that had followed her from the past. The man's words were sharp. "You can't hide here forever," he said. "You owe money, responsibility, and answers. You can't run from this." Emily's hands shook. She wanted to respond, to fight back, but the words caught in her throat. She had spent years running, and confrontation terrified her. Daniel placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, grounding her, letting her know she wasn't alone. "I'll help her resolve this," Daniel said calmly. "We can find a way that works, without threats or trouble." The man's eyes narrowed. "And what are you to her? Some hero? She can't escape her past because of your protection." Daniel's voice remained steady. "I'm just someone who believes she deserves a chance to face her life without fear." Emily watched him, awe and gratitude mingling with guilt. He had risked his life to save her once, and now he was standing beside her again, putting himself in uncomfortable and potentially dangerous situations to ensure she was safe. She realized that this kind of care was rare. It was not about control or judgment. It was about choice, about protecting someone while respecting their independence. The confrontation lasted hours, with Daniel negotiating calmly, explaining, reasoning. Emily listened, still scared, but slowly she began to feel a sense of hope. There was a way forward, a way to face her past without letting it destroy the fragile peace she had found in Willow Creek. After the man left, defeated and unwilling to press further, Emily sat quietly on the porch of her cabin, staring out at the rolling fields. She felt a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and something else she couldn't quite name. Courage, perhaps, or maybe the first glimmer of trust that someone could truly be there for her without taking advantage of her fear. Over the next few days, Emily began helping at Daniel's ranch more frequently. She had learned to ride the horses, to feed the cattle, to fix fences, and to work the land. Each task grounded her, giving her a sense of purpose and routine she had not felt in years. The physical work was demanding, but it helped her forget, even if only briefly, the anxiety that clung to her after years of running. Daniel never pushed her. He simply offered guidance when she asked, and quietly observed when she needed space. Sometimes they worked side by side in silence, the rhythm of their labor and the sounds of the ranch providing a calm backdrop. Other times they talked about small things, the weather, the animals, the quiet beauty of the land. These conversations, simple as they were, helped Emily realize that healing did not need to be rushed. It could happen slowly, one day at a time. One evening, after a long day of work, Emily and Daniel sat on the fence overlooking the fields. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Emily felt a rare sense of peace. The wind moved gently through the grass, carrying with it the smell of earth and rain, and she realized that, for the first time in a long time, she felt grounded. Daniel broke the silence. "You're stronger than you think," he said quietly. Emily shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips. "I don't feel strong. I feel lucky. Luck has little to do with it. You've survived storms, faced fears, and made choices. That's strength." Emily looked out over the fields, thinking about everything that had happened. The storm, the fear, the confrontation with her past, and the quiet patience of the man who had saved her. She realized that being saved did not mean giving up control of her life. It meant having someone by her side who would let her make choices, who would protect her without taking over, and who believed in her even when she didn't believe in herself. In the weeks that followed, Emily continued to grow more confident. She began taking responsibility for her past, slowly paying off debts and resolving unfinished matters. Daniel's support gave her courage, but she refused to let his help define her. She wanted to face her life on her own terms, even if that meant confronting fears she had spent years avoiding. One afternoon, a neighbor invited Emily to help organize a small-town event, a picnic for the local children and families. At first, she hesitated, afraid of being noticed or judged, but Daniel encouraged her quietly, reminding her that small steps could lead to big changes. She agreed, and as she worked with other townspeople, she felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced in years. People smiled at her, shared stories, and included her in their plans. For the first time, Emily realized that life could be more than survival. It could be connection, community, and hope. Through all of this, Daniel remained a steady presence. He never sought recognition, never asked for repayment. He simply offered support, guidance, and quiet strength. Emily noticed, day by day, that his care was selfless. It was not about control, judgment, or obligation. It was about believing that people deserved a chance to live fully, even after mistakes and pain. One evening, as Emily and Daniel repaired a fence together, she finally spoke words that had been forming in her mind for weeks. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly, her hands resting on the post she was holding. Daniel smiled faintly. "You don't need to. You're alive, and you're choosing to live. That's enough." Emily looked at him, seeing the quiet determination in his eyes. She understood, finally, that the man who had saved her was not looking for praise or gratitude. He simply believed in doing what was right, even when it was hard, even when it carried risk. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, Emily felt a sense of peace she had never known. The past still lingered, but she no longer felt trapped by it. She had survived the storm, faced part of her past, and discovered that life could be lived again, with courage, with patience, and with someone by her side who believed in her strength even when she doubted it herself. Daniel's hand rested briefly on her shoulder as they walked back to the barn. No words were spoken, but Emily felt a warmth and reassurance that words could never convey. The bond between them had grown, quietly, patiently, and firmly. It was not yet love, not yet romance. It was trust, care, and understanding. And for Emily, that was enough. The days grew longer and warmer in Willow Creek as spring turned into early summer. The fields shimmered with green under the sun. The creek sparkled with clear water, and the scent of fresh hay and earth filled the air. Life on the Harper Ranch had returned to its usual rhythm, cattle grazing in the pastures, horses being trained, and chores being completed with steady hands and careful attention. Yet for Emily, life was no longer just about surviving. It was about living, and that realization came slowly, day by day. Emily had been helping on the ranch more regularly now. She had learned to ride confidently, to tend to the animals, and to manage simple tasks like mending fences or stacking hay. Each day gave her a small sense of pride, a proof that she could face responsibilities without fear. Yet, more importantly, she was learning to face herself, the guilt, the regrets, the mistakes she had tried to bury for years. Daniel never forced her to confront these things. He simply offered guidance when asked, and his quiet presence when she needed reassurance. That presence had become a lifeline, steady and comforting, reminding her that she was not alone. But even with all the progress she had made, Emily knew there were still challenges ahead. She had resolved most of her immediate problems, but the weight of her past remained. The man who had followed her to Willow Creek had been dealt with, yet Emily still felt the subtle, lingering fear that her mistakes could follow her anywhere. She realized that surviving the storm and facing her past were just the beginning. Learning to live freely, without being held hostage by guilt or fear, was the real challenge. One late afternoon, as Emily worked in the fields repairing a fence, Daniel rode up on his horse. His expression was calm, but his eyes held a seriousness that immediately caught her attention. "Emily," he said, dismounting, "there's something I want to talk to you about." She wiped her hands on her jeans and approached him cautiously. "What is it?" she asked, a faint nervousness in her voice. Daniel gestured to the fence they had been repairing. "You've come a long way," he said slowly. "You've faced fears, taken responsibility, and started rebuilding your life. But I want you to understand something. Surviving isn't just about avoiding danger or facing the past, it's about choosing to live, to move forward, and to embrace life even when it's uncertain." Emily looked down, thinking about his words. She had spent so long running, so long hiding, that the very idea of choosing life deliberately felt foreign. She had survived storms, confrontations, and fears, but choosing to live fully, that was new territory. Daniel placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "You don't have to do it alone," he said. "I'll be here, not to control, not to rescue, but to support. You can face life on your terms, but you don't have to face it by yourself." Emily felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mix of gratitude, relief, and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. For the first time, she realized that being saved didn't mean losing control. It meant having the courage to face life with someone beside her who believed in her strength. The next weeks were filled with small but meaningful steps. Emily began taking on new responsibilities around town, helping neighbors, volunteering for events, and participating in community activities she had once avoided. Each task, no matter how small, reinforced her confidence and her sense of belonging. She discovered that people were kind, patient, and willing to accept her for who she was, not just for what she had survived. Meanwhile, Daniel continued to be her quiet anchor. He never asked for attention or praise, never reminded her of the risks he had taken, and never pressured her to move faster than she could. His support was steady, reliable, and selfless. Emily realized that his care was different from anything she had ever known. It was not about expectation or obligation, but about genuine concern and trust. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in warm shades of orange and gold, Emily and Daniel sat on the porch of the ranch, overlooking the fields. The air was filled with the soft sounds of crickets, the distant lowing of cattle, and the gentle rustling of the wind through the grass. Emily felt a sense of peace she had never known. The past still lingered, but it no longer controlled her. She was alive, present, and capable of making her own choices. Daniel broke the silence, his voice quiet but steady. "You've changed," he said, "not just in the way you face challenges, but in the way you see life. You've learned to trust yourself again, Emily smiled faintly, a mix of gratitude and humility in her expression. I couldn't have done it without you, she admitted. You didn't just save me from the storm. You helped me find myself again. Daniel shook his head gently. I didn't save you. You saved yourself. I only reminded you that you could. Her smile grew, and for the first time, she felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. She realized that survival wasn't enough anymore. She wanted to live fully, to embrace opportunities, to connect with people, and to face challenges with courage. And she knew she could, because Daniel had shown her that trust, patience, and quiet support could help someone rebuild their life without taking it over. The town of Willow Creek began to notice the change in Emily. People who had once seen her as withdrawn and cautious now watched her engage with life with determination and hope. She became more involved in community activities, helping organize events for children, assisting neighbors with chores, and even participating in local fairs. Her presence became a gentle reminder to others that even those who carry heavy burdens can find strength and purpose again. Yet, despite her progress, Emily never forgot the lesson of the storm, the fragility of life, and the value of courage. She remembered the icy water, the fear that had threatened to consume her, and the quiet determination of the man who had risked his life to save her. Daniel's actions had taught her that life could be full of unexpected kindness, bravery, and hope, even in moments of danger and despair. One day, as Emily worked alongside Daniel repairing a barn roof, she paused and looked at him. I don't think I ever told you what I really felt that night, she said softly. Daniel glanced at her, curious but patient. What do you mean? I was angry, she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. Not at you, but at myself. I didn't want to be saved because I thought I didn't deserve a chance. But now I see that being saved doesn't take anything away from me. It gives me a choice. Daniel nodded, his expression calm and understanding. And what will you do with that choice? Emily smiled, a sense of determination and hope in her eyes. I'll live. Fully. Honestly. And I won't let fear or guilt control me anymore. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the fields, and Emily felt a sense of clarity she hadn't experienced before. She realized that life was not about avoiding mistakes or escaping challenges. It was about facing them with courage, learning from them, and growing stronger. She knew there would still be storms, both literal and metaphorical, but she was ready to face them step by step, with Daniel by her side if she chose. In the weeks that followed, Emily continued to rebuild her life, balancing her work on the ranch, her responsibilities in town, and her own personal growth. She learned to manage her fears, accept her past, and embrace new experiences. Slowly, she began to see herself not as someone who needed saving, but as someone capable of making choices, taking risks, and living fully. Daniel remained her steady presence throughout. He never demanded anything from her, never sought recognition, and never tried to control her path. His support was quiet, patient, and unwavering. Emily realized that he had taught her one of the most important lessons of all, that trust, kindness, and courage can exist without expectation, and that true care is shown through actions, not words. One quiet evening, as the sky turned shades of purple and gold, Emily and Daniel sat together on the fence, watching the sun set over the fields. The wind moved gently through the grass, carrying the scent of earth and flowers, and Emily felt a profound sense of peace. I didn't understand it at first, she said softly. I didn't understand why you risked everything for me. Daniel shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. I didn't risk anything for you, he said. I did what anyone would do. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't feel like risk, it feels like what's necessary. Emily looked at him, gratitude and understanding shining in her eyes. I think I understand now, she said. It wasn't just about saving me from the storm. It was about showing me that life is worth facing, even when it's hard. Daniel nodded. Exactly. And now it's your turn to face it. Your way, on your own terms. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun and the cool evening breeze. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive. She knew the past would always be a part of her, but it no longer defined her. She had survived, faced her fears and discovered strength she didn't know she possessed, and she had learned that being saved was not about losing control. It was about choosing to live. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Emily realized that her journey was just beginning. There would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt, and new lessons to learn. But she was ready. She had chosen to stay, to face life fully, and to embrace the opportunities before her. And in that choice, she found freedom, hope, and the quiet, steady promise of a life worth living.